The screeching of tires echoed through the busy lanes of Interstate 35 between Austin and San Antonio as drivers slammed on their brakes. Angry honks filled the air until they saw what had caused the commotion. Standing in the middle of the highway, like a ghostly apparition, was a small white horse. The scorching Texas sun reflected off her coat, which had once been snow-white, but now displayed patches of dirt and dried blood. Her thin legs visibly trembled, yet her stance remained firm, unwavering. Her sides rose and fell rapidly with each labored breath, revealing profound exhaustion. But it wasn't just her physical condition that left motorists paralyzed. It was her eyes. Those deep brown eyes radiated something beyond human comprehension, a mixture of fear, intelligence, and desperation, so palpable it seemed to transform the air around her. There was a plea in that gaze, something that transcended basic animal survival instinct. Officer Nolan Hayes was finishing his shift when he received the unusual call over the radio. "We have a horse blocking traffic on I-35 around mile marker 173. Multiple drivers reporting. Any units available to check it out?" After confirming his response, Nolan drove to the location, expecting to find the usual confusion of frightened animals fleeing from nearby farms. When he arrived, the scene had already evolved into a considerable traffic jam, with drivers stepping out of their vehicles to observe the strange spectacle. The officer parked his patrol car on the shoulder and approached cautiously. 16 years on the police force had prepared him for almost everything, but the sight of that exhausted horse, standing in the middle of the lane with an almost human determination, wasn't in any of the training manuals. "Careful, officer, she looks scared," shouted a nearby motorist. Nolan raised his hand in acknowledgement of the warning, but kept his steps deliberately slow, approaching the animal with the experience of someone who had grown up in a family of horse breeders. That's when something extraordinary happened. The small horse turned her head toward Nolan, her eyes locked onto his with a disconcerting intensity. And then, contrary to all expected behavior from an injured wild animal, she began to walk, not away, not in panic, but directly toward him, as if she had chosen him. "Easy, girl," murmured Nolan, an inexplicable feeling forming in his chest. "What are you trying to tell me?" Up close, the situation proved even more disturbing. Old scars crossed the horse's back and flanks, silent evidence of past mistreatment. Her hooves were cracked and raw, the result of a long run, and tightly fastened around her neck was a small metallic device. With the horse now quiet by his side, as if she had completed the first part of some mysterious mission, Nolan made a quick call to the local wildlife department. "I need a specialist here now." 20 minutes later, a tall man in field clothes approached the scene. Atticus Wilson was the most respected wildlife specialist in the region, known for his ability to understand animal behavior like few others. "Never seen anything like this," commented Atticus, observing how the horse kept close to Nolan, refusing to move more than a few yards away from him. After carefully examining the device around her neck, Atticus's expression changed from confusion to shock. "This isn't a standard identification tag. It's an emergency locator." He swallowed hard, his eyes meeting Nolan's. "This horse is looking for help, on purpose." A considerable crowd had already formed on the shoulder of the highway, people drawn by the unusual scene and the presence of police vehicles. Among them, a middle-aged woman made her way to the front. "I don't believe it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's Astra. She belongs to the Horizon Equine Therapy Center." "You know this animal?" asked Nolan, noticing how the horse's ears perked up at hearing her name. "My son is autistic," explained the woman, introducing herself as Celine. "He never spoke to anyone until he met Astra. This horse changed our lives." Atticus was already on the phone verifying the identification code on the locator. His face visibly paled as he listened to the information on the other end of the line. "Rowan Blackwood," he announced, hanging up. "The head trainer at Horizon Center. He's been missing for almost 48 hours. Left for training with Astra and never returned." Nolan observed the small white horse, who now seemed restless, moving nervously and repeatedly, looking toward the dense forest beside the highway. There was hesitation in her posture, a deeply rooted fear fighting against an unshakable purpose. "She's trying to lead us to him," murmured Nolan, a certainty forming in his core. Then, with a soft whiny, Astra made her choice. She stepped forward toward the forest, and Nolan followed. The first raindrops were beginning to fall when Atticus and Nolan entered the density of Lost Maples State Natural Area, following the cautious steps of the small white horse. Astra moved with surprising determination for an animal in her condition, exhausted, dehydrated, and visibly injured. "We should call for air rescue," suggested Atticus, worriedly observing the storm clouds rapidly accumulating in the Texas sky. "This area has almost 3,000 acres of rough terrain." Nolan nodded but didn't slow his pace. "I've already called them, but with this storm coming in, the helicopters will have difficulty. We need to keep going." The officer had spent the first 16 years of his life on his parents' ranch before trading it for a police badge. He knew horses well enough to understand that Astra's behavior was extraordinary. Every few yards she stopped and looked back, as if to make sure they were still following her. Her eyes, too expressive for an animal, seemed to say, "Please don't give up." As they advanced through increasingly steep terrain, Atticus shared what he had discovered about Astra through quick radio consultations. "So she was rescued 3 years ago from a situation of extreme abuse," explained the specialist, his professional voice masking the underlying indignation. "She was practically dying when they found her, abandoned in a collapsing barn. Rowan rehabilitated her personally. According to Horizon Center records, she had a pathological fear of roads and vehicles. And yet she crossed a busy state highway to seek help," observed Nolan, admiration evident in his voice. The small white horse led the way with disconcerting precision, ignoring easier trails to follow a path that seemed to exist only in her memory. Each step clearly caused her pain, but she refused to stop or slow down. "I've never seen anything like this," muttered Atticus in disbelief. "She's suffering, but she won't give up." After nearly 2 hours of walking through increasingly difficult terrain, with the rain thickening every minute, Astra suddenly stopped. They were at the edge of a steep ravine, partially hidden by dense vegetation. The horse's ears moved nervously, picking up sounds imperceptible to human ears. Then she let out a piercing, desperate whine. The communication was as clear as words. "Here, he is here." Nolan pointed his flashlight downward, illuminating the steep slope. About 60 feet below, partially visible under fallen rocks and debris, was the motionless figure of a man. "Rowan," whispered Atticus, immediately advancing to assess the situation. The rain was now falling hard, making the terrain slippery and dangerous. Nolan activated his radio, requesting emergency rescue with teams specialized in rough terrain. Victim located approximately 6 miles west of the main entrance to Lost Maples. Condition unknown, difficult access. We need rappelling equipment and medical team. While waiting for rescue to arrive, Nolan and Atticus worked together to create improvised access to Rowan. The man was unconscious but alive, his breathing weak but steady. A large rock pinned his left leg, and various cuts and bruises covered his body. Incredibly, Astra refused to stay at the top of the ravine. After several minutes of growing agitation, she found a more gradual path and carefully descended the slope, positioning herself beside her fallen trainer. Amid the confusion of rain and rescue preparations, something extraordinary happened. Rowan slightly opened his eyes, his blurry gaze finding the familiar white figure by his side. Tears mingled with rain on his dirty face. "Astra," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. "You came back." The small horse gently lowered her head, pressing her muzzle against Rowan's trembling fingers. There was a silent communication there, a language beyond words that spoke of trust, loyalty, and a bond that transcended species. The rescue teams arrived in record time, despite the adverse weather conditions. Paramedics worked quickly to stabilize Rowan, while rescue specialists set up pulley systems to transport him up the slope. Throughout the process, Astra remained steadfast by Rowan's side. Each time the rain caused dangerous landslides, she positioned herself between her trainer and the edge of the ravine, ready to fall with him if necessary. The paramedics worked frantically, but Astra refused to move, even as her legs visibly trembled, even as her breathing became irregular and difficult. "So she won't last much longer," murmured Atticus, concern evident in his voice. "We need to get her out of here too." But no one had the heart to pull the horse away from her protector. There was something almost sacred in that silent vigil, in that demonstration of devotion beyond comprehension. When they finally managed to immobilize Rowan's leg and prepare him for transport, something unexpected happened. Astra stumbled. Her legs, which had traveled miles despite pain and exhaustion, finally gave way. With a soft, almost resigned sigh, the small white horse collapsed in the mud. Nolan immediately dropped to his knees beside her, wrapping her neck in a protective embrace. The rain was now falling in torrents, but no one moved, all paralyzed by the moving scene before them. "You're the most unlikely hero I've ever met," whispered Nolan in the exhausted horse's ear. Against all odds, Astra's eyes remained open, fixed on Rowan's figure being carefully lifted onto a stretcher. Only when he was secure being taken upward did she finally allow herself to close her eyes. The white, sterile light of the state hospital cast soft shadows on Rowan Blackwood's face as he floated between consciousness and darkness. Fragments of memory passed through his mind like leaves in the wind. The routine training with Astra in the hills, the sudden tremor of the earth beneath his feet, the searing pain when the rock crushed his leg, and then the impossible choice. "You need to go, girl," he had murmured, his voice weak as he tied his emergency locator around Astra's neck. "Go get help." The small horse had trembled violently, refusing to leave him, her large, frightened eyes reflecting the deep terror she felt of roads and vehicles, a fear rooted since she was nearly run over as a foal. "I know you're scared," Rowan had whispered, caressing her muzzle one last time, "but you're my only chance." In his heart, though, he was saying goodbye. He never believed she would actually do it, that she would overcome her deepest trauma to save him. The constant beeping of heart monitors brought Rowan back to the present. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the intense light. A nurse noticed his movement and quickly approached, checking his vital signs. "Welcome back," she smiled. "You have many people anxious to see you." Rowan's mind was still confused, but a single question formed on his dry lips. "Astra," the nurse's expression softened. "Your horse is fine. She's at the State University Animal Recovery Center. The veterinarians say she'll make a full recovery." A knot formed in Rowan's throat. "She found me help." "She did much more than that," replied a male voice from the doorway. Rowan turned to see Officer Nolan Hayes entering the room, accompanied by Atticus Wilson and Miranda Chen, the director of the Horizon Equine Therapy Center. "Rowan, thank God." Miranda quickly approached, her eyes shining with contained tears. In her early 50s, with her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, she emanated the calm strength of someone who had dedicated her life to healing others through connection with animals. In the hours that followed, as doctors came and went to examine him, Rowan heard the complete story, how Astra had traversed miles of rough terrain, overcome her greatest fear by crossing a busy highway, and literally chosen Nolan to follow her back to her injured trainer. "The doctors say you wouldn't have survived another night," commented Atticus, his usual professional reserve replaced by genuine admiration. "The storm would have caused landslides that would likely have completely buried you." "She's famous, you know," added Miranda, showing him her tablet. On the screen, an amateur video showed Astra standing in the middle of the highway, cars braking around her, her determination almost palpable even in the grainy recording. More than 3 million views since yesterday. Rowan observed the images, a complex feeling of pride and humility filling his chest. "She was always special," he murmured. "From day one." Nolan, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. "May I ask how you found her?" Rowan briefly closed his eyes, painful memories resurfacing. 3 years ago, a case of severe neglect on an abandoned property. She was in a collapsing barn, malnourished, covered in infected wounds. The owner had simply left, leaving her to die. The room fell silent for a moment, human cruelty hanging like a shadow between them. "Most specialists recommended euthanasia," continued Rowan, his voice low. "They said she was too traumatized, that she would never trust humans again. But there was something in her eyes." He paused, emotion closing his throat. "A resilience, a will to live despite everything. And you saved her," concluded Miranda softly. Rowan shook his head. "No, we saved each other." In the days that followed, as Rowan began the long journey of recovery, news of Astra continued to spread. Local journalists, then national and finally international ones, told the story of the small white horse that had defied all instincts of self-preservation to save her trainer. 1 week after the rescue, still connected to monitors and with his leg in a cast, Rowan received a special visit, personally authorized by the hospital director after a viral campaign on social media. The sonorous clop-clop of hooves on the linoleum corridor announced the arrival even before the door opened. And then, there she was, Astra, healthy, clean. Her white coat gleamed under the hospital lights, and the small star-shaped mark on her forehead shone like a beacon. Carefully led by Miranda and accompanied by a veterinarian, the small horse entered the room with delicate steps, her eyes immediately finding Rowan's. The moment of recognition between them was so intimate, so profound, that the humans present felt almost like intruders. Astra approached the hospital bed, gently lowering her head until her muzzle touched Rowan's extended fingers. "Hello, brave girl," he whispered, tears flowing freely down his face. "You did it, didn't you? You found me help." Astra's eyes, those same determined eyes that had stopped traffic to save a life, shone with an intelligence and compassion that transcended the barriers between species. No one in the room had dry eyes that day. 3 weeks later, the story had already assumed almost mythological proportions. The video of Astra on Interstate 35 had accumulated more than 30 million views. Interviews with drivers who witnessed the event revealed details that further amplified the horse's extraordinary behavior. "She looked straight into my eyes, like she was pleading," a woman told CNN, emotion still evident in her voice. "I shooed her away, frightened. Now I realize she was trying to tell me something. I wish I had understood sooner." Still confined to St. David's Medical Center, Rowan watched the media coverage with conflicting feelings. On one hand, the public recognition of Astra's extraordinary feat was gratifying. On the other, the sudden attention caused discomfort for someone accustomed to the relative tranquility of working with traumatized animals. What no one expected, however, was the impact the story would have beyond its momentary sentimental value. The small, star-shaped mark on Astra's forehead had become a national symbol of resilience. Artists created stylized representations of it, which appeared on t-shirts, mugs, and even as tattoos. But more importantly than that, the story had inspired a wave of interest in equine therapy and the transformative potential of rescued animals. On a particularly sunny morning, Miranda entered the hospital room carrying a stack of correspondence and an expression of happy amazement on her face. "You won't believe what's happening," she said, depositing envelopes and documents on Rowan's table. "We've received more than $200,000 in donations in the last week. People are literally driving from other states to visit the Horizon Center." Rowan leafed through the papers, eyebrows raised in surprise. "This is incredible," he murmured. "And there's more," continued Miranda, practically vibrating with excitement. "The State Department of Mental Health and the Veterans Association have reached out. They want to expand our program to include specific treatment for PTSD and trauma." A slow smile formed on Rowan's face. "The animals that nobody wanted, helping people everyone forgot," he reflected, an idea beginning to crystallize in his mind. "What do you think about formalizing this? A program dedicated to training rescued animals for therapeutic assistance?" Miranda smiled, already ahead of him. "I'm already working on it. I'm calling it the Unlikely Heroes Project." That same afternoon, Nolan Hayes made his now habitual visit to the hospital. Since the rescue, an unlikely friendship had formed between the police officer and the equine therapist. There was something in the shared experience of that day in the ravine, the struggle against the elements, the deep connection with Astra, the thin line between life and death that had created an instant bond between the two men. "I brought something you need to see," announced Nolan, handing Rowan a folder of documents. "We're receiving reports from all over the state about rescued animals demonstrating extraordinary behaviors. A dog that alerted about a gas leak in a nursing home, a cat that adopted an orphaned baby in a shelter. It's as if Astra's story had awakened a collective consciousness about the potential of these animals." Rowan examined the reports with growing interest. "I've always known there was something special about animals that overcame trauma," he commented. "A sensitivity, an empathy that others don't develop in the same way. As if they understood human pain because they experienced something similar," agreed Nolan. "That's why I came. I want to help with this Unlikely Heroes project. Miranda told me about it." Rowan looked up, surprised. "You? But what about your police work?" Nolan smiled, a determined gleam in his eyes. "I requested a transfer to the K9 unit. I'll be working with police dogs, specifically with rescues that would normally be considered unsuitable for training." A nurse entered the room, momentarily interrupting the conversation. "Mr. Blackwood, it's time for your physical therapy. And," she hesitated, a smile forming on her lips, "your special assistant is already waiting." Rowan and Nolan exchanged intrigued looks, following the nurse to the recently adapted physical therapy room at the end of the corridor. Opening the door, both stopped, surprised. Astra was there, accompanied by Miranda and the hospital veterinarian, but she wasn't alone. Seated in a child's wheelchair, a girl of approximately 7 years observed the horse with wide eyes of admiration. Her dark hair was carefully braided, decorated with small, star-shaped clips, a clear tribute to the mark on Astra's forehead. "This is Lucia," Miranda introduced softly. She and her mother drove 4 hours to visit us. Lucia has nonverbal autism and typically doesn't interact with strangers, but when she saw the report about Astra on television, the girl, as if sensing they were talking about her, turned. In her lap rested a carefully colored drawing, a white horse with a star on its forehead, standing in the middle of a grey road. "She hasn't stopped drawing Astra since she saw the story," explained the girl's mother, emotion evident in her voice. "When we learned that Astra was visiting you in the hospital, I simply had to bring her." Rowan, supported by his crutches, carefully approached. "Hello, Lucia. My name is Rowan. I see you've already met my friend Astra." The girl didn't respond verbally, nor did she look directly at him, behaviors typical of her autism. Instead, her fingers caressed the drawing in her lap, her eyes fixed on the small white horse that observed the scene with that wise calm that seemed to define her. Following the protocol he used at the Horizon Center, Rowan didn't force interaction. Instead, he began his physical therapy session as planned, exercising the injured leg under the therapist's guidance, with Astra strategically positioned to provide emotional and, occasionally, physical support. The session proceeded normally for approximately 20 minutes, with Lucia silently observing from the corner. Then, without warning, the girl moved her wheelchair closer, hesitantly approaching Astra. All the adults in the room froze, watching with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Children with autism often connected with animals in profound ways, but each interaction was unique, unpredictable. With deliberately slow movements, Lucia extended her hand. Astra gently lowered her head, allowing the small fingers to touch her muzzle. And then, a moment that no one present would ever forget. Lucia stood up from her wheelchair, took 2 faltering steps toward the horse, and gently wrapped her arms around Astra's neck. And then, in the softest of whispers, a word: hero. The silence that followed was absolute. And then, tears on every adult face. "She spoke," whispered Lucia's mother, a hand covering her mouth in absolute shock. "My God, she spoke. She never, not a word in 7 years." Rowan observed the scene, his heart overflowing with indescribable emotion. There, in the gentle embrace between a child who didn't speak and a horse that had nearly died, was something almost sacred, a communication beyond words, a mutual recognition that transcended barriers both human and animal. In that moment, the Unlikely Heroes Project ceased to be just an inspiring idea and became a mission. 6 months had passed since the extraordinary rescue. The Texas autumn painted the landscape in golden and red tones, creating a spectacular backdrop for the ceremony taking place on the newly expanded grounds of the Horizon Equine Therapy Center. Under a white tent decorated with blue and silver ribbons, more than 200 people gathered for the official inauguration of the first dedicated center of the Unlikely Heroes Project. What had begun as a local initiative had now transformed into a nationally recognized non-profit organization with branches emerging in 5 different states. Rowan Blackwood, still using a cane due to permanent damage in his left leg, observed the crowd with a mixture of pride and incredulity. Dressed in a tailored suit that couldn't hide his still thin frame, he marveled at how a tragedy had transformed into something so meaningful. Miranda Chen stood at the podium, her typically reserved demeanor replaced by electric enthusiasm as she addressed the attendees, donors, volunteers, medical professionals, and families whose lives had been touched by the emerging program. "When we rescue an animal," she was saying, "we often think we're the ones doing the saving. But what Astra taught us is that sometimes it's they who save us, not just physically as she did with Rowan, but emotionally, spiritually, showing us compassion and resilience that we as humans sometimes struggle to maintain." In the front row, Officer Nolan Hayes nodded in agreement. Now the head of the newly formed Animal Rescue Unit of the State Police, he had become an integral part of the project, identifying animals with therapeutic potential during police interventions. Beside him sat Lucia and her mother. The girl who had spoken her first word to Astra 6 months earlier now participated in weekly sessions at the center. She still didn't speak much, but her therapists reported remarkable progress in her social interaction and emotional regulation. Astra herself stood near the platform, a special guest of honor at the ceremony. Her white coat gleamed in the autumn sun, the star mark on her forehead, now a symbol recognized throughout the country. At her side were 5 other horses, all rescues, all part of the first training class of the Unlikely Heroes Project. As Miranda concluded her speech, she gestured for Rowan to join her on the platform. He rose slowly, leaning on his cane, and made his way to the microphone amid enthusiastic applause. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady, despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "I was trapped in a ravine during a storm, my leg crushed under a rock. I made an impossible choice. I sent Astra, a horse terrified of roads and traffic, to find help. In my heart I was saying goodbye. I never expected her to overcome her greatest fear to save me." He paused, looking at the assembled crowd. "That day I learned something profound about trauma, about fear and about courage. Astra didn't stop being afraid of roads. She's still terrified of them, but she found something greater than fear: purpose. That's what we're trying to do here at the Unlikely Heroes Project. We're not trying to fix traumatized animals or people. We're helping them find a purpose greater than their fear." The crowd fell silent, absorbing his words. "This horse," Rowan continued, gesturing toward Astra, "understands pain in a way most humans never will. She doesn't judge. She simply understands. And that understanding creates a bridge, a connection that allows healing to begin." As if on cue, Astra approached the platform, stopping at the steps leading up to it. Several people in the audience gasped softly at this apparently choreographed movement, but Rowan knew better. Astra had always had an uncanny sense of timing, an almost supernatural ability to know exactly when she was needed. Climbing down from the platform, Rowan stood beside his faithful companion, placing a gentle hand on her neck. "In the 6 months since we started this program, we've worked with 27 rescued animals and over 60 people suffering from PTSD, autism, and various forms of trauma. The results have been nothing short of miraculous." Miranda stepped forward again, taking over the microphone. "Today we're not just inaugurating a building, we're launching a movement. Thanks to the incredible generosity of our donors and the support of state agencies, the Unlikely Heroes Project will be opening centers in California, New York, Florida, and Colorado within the next year." The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. "And now," Miranda continued with a smile, "I'd like to invite someone special to officially cut the ribbon. Governor Williams, would you please do the honors?" The crowd parted as the governor of Texas made his way to the front, carrying what appeared to be a small, decorated box. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a commanding presence, Governor Williams first approached Astra, bowing slightly in a gesture of respect that caused murmurs of approval among the attendees. "On behalf of the great state of Texas," she announced in a strong, clear voice, "I am honored to present Astra with the state's first-ever Medal of Exceptional Service for an Animal." Opening the box, she revealed a small gold medallion on a blue ribbon. With Miranda's help, she carefully placed it around Astra's neck, next to the special harness that identified her as a therapy animal. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, many wiping tears from their eyes at the unprecedented honor. "And now," the governor continued, "let us officially open this remarkable center where unlikely heroes will help heal invisible wounds." With a flourish, she cut the blue ribbon stretched across the entrance of the new building, officially launching what would soon become a nationwide movement in animal-assisted therapy. 1 year to the day after Astra stood in the middle of Interstate 35, the Unlikely Heroes Project had helped over 1,200 people and sparked the creation of 15 similar centers nationwide. The small white horse with the star on her forehead had become an icon, her image synonymous with resilience, courage, and the healing power of the bond between humans and animals. As the Texas sun began its gentle descent toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the grounds of the Horizon Center, Rowan Blackwood sat on a bench overlooking the newly constructed sensory garden. His cane rested beside him, a permanent reminder of his ordeal, but one he now regarded with a strange gratitude. Without that injury, without that desperate moment in the ravine, none of this would exist. Behind him, the sounds of the center in full operation created a soothing backdrop. Soft voices of therapists, the occasional whinny of a horse, and the laughter of children engaging with the animals. What had once been a modest equine therapy program operating on a shoestring budget was now a state-of-the-art facility, employing 30 full-time staff and serving hundreds of clients each month. Approaching footsteps on the gravel path caused Rowan to turn. Officer, now Sergeant Nolan Hayes, walked toward him, leading a German shepherd with an unusual tri-colored coat pattern. "Thought you might want to meet our newest recruit," Nolan said by way of greeting, sitting beside Rowan on the bench. "This is Maverick. Found him chained to a dumpster behind a gas station last month, half-starved and terrified of men." The shelter was going to put him down because he was too aggressive for adoption. Rowan observed the dog, noting the intelligence in his amber eyes and the way he pressed close to Nolan's leg, seeking security. And now he's the most promising detection dog I've ever worked with, Nolan replied with evident pride. So has a nose like you wouldn't believe, and a drive to work that puts the purebreds to shame. Still nervous around strangers, especially men, but we're making progress. Rowan nodded, understanding perfectly. The trauma doesn't disappear. It becomes part of who they are, but not all they are. Exactly, agreed Nolan. Speaking of which, where's our founding hero today? As if summoned by the question, Astra appeared from around a curve in the garden path. She moved with her characteristic grace, her white coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Beside her walked a teenage boy in a wheelchair, guiding her with gentle touches rather than the reins loosely draped around her neck. That's Jason, Rowan explained softly. Marine. Lost both legs in Afghanistan, came to us 3 months ago, barely speaking, refusing physical therapy, convinced his life was over. Nolan watched as the young man guided Astra toward a series of low obstacles specifically designed for wheelchair users to navigate alongside therapy horses. The change in the boy's demeanor was striking. His shoulders straight, his movements confident, his face animated as he communicated silently with the horse at his side. Amazing how much someone can heal in 3 months, mused Nolan. Rowan's smile was tinged with a knowing sadness. The body maybe, the spirit takes longer, but having someone who understands your pain without words, it makes a difference. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as Jason successfully completed the obstacle course with Astra, his face breaking into a rare smile at his accomplishment. You know what today is, right? Asked Nolan finally. Rowan nodded. 1 year exactly, hard to believe. The department wanted to do something to commemorate it. They commissioned this. Nolan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, handing it to Rowan. Inside was a beautifully crafted silver pin in the shape of a horse with a star on its forehead. Engraved on the back were the words, "Some heroes have hooves. Astra Day, March 19th. Astra Day? Rowan asked, his voice catching slightly. Nolan grinned. Governor's making it official, an annual day to recognize the contribution of therapy animals throughout the state. Not bad for a horse everyone wanted to put down, huh? Rowan closed his fingers around the pin, emotion welling in his chest. I always told Miranda that Astra had a purpose, that she was meant for something important. I just never imagined how important. As the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, visitors began to gather in the central courtyard for the evening's special commemoration ceremony. Families whose lives had been touched by the program, donors whose generosity had made its expansion possible, volunteers who gave their time and hearts to the cause, all coming together to celebrate the extraordinary journey of one small white horse and the movement she had inspired. Astra herself seemed to sense the significance of the occasion. After completing her session with Jason, she made her way to Rowan's side, gently nudging his shoulder with her muzzle in their familiar greeting. Her eyes, those same determined eyes that had once stopped traffic to save a life, held a tranquility now, a peace that came from purpose fulfilled. Later that evening, as lanterns illuminated the Horizon Center grounds and Rowan addressed the assembled crowd from a small stage, he found himself overcome with a profound sense of gratitude. 1 year ago today, a small white horse with a star on her forehead stood in the middle of a highway looking for someone to follow her. He began, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. She had every reason to run away, to hide, to protect herself from a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Instead, she chose courage. She chose to return for me. He paused, his gaze finding Astra where she stood calmly at the edge of the stage. I'll continue the story from where we left off. He paused, his gaze finding Astra where she stood calmly at the edge of the stage, the ceremonial medal still hanging from her special halter, reflecting the soft glow of the lanterns. In doing so, she didn't just save one life. She started a movement that has now touched thousands. Every person here tonight has their own story, their own journey with pain, with struggle, with moments when giving up seemed like the only option, and every rescued animal in our program has a similar story. Around the courtyard, heads nodded in agreement, and a few quiet sniffles could be heard among the audience. What Astra taught us, what all these extraordinary animals continue to teach us, is that trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something new, something powerful. Miranda joined him on stage, bringing with her a large covered display. With a nod from Rowan, she unveiled it, a beautiful mosaic made up of hundreds of tiny photographs, forming the image of Astra standing in the middle of the highway. Each small photo represented a person or animal whose life had been changed by the Unlikely Heroes Project. "This is our legacy," Rowan continued, gesturing to the mosaic. "Not just Astra's and mine, but all of yours as well. Every volunteer, every donor, every family brave enough to seek healing through connection, you're all part of this story." In the front row, Lucia, the once non-verbal girl who had spoken her first word to Astra, now sat with several other children from the program. No longer confined to her wheelchair, she had progressed to using leg braces that allowed her increasing mobility. The small star-shaped clips still adorned her hair, a constant reminder of her connection to the horse that had broken through her silence. "1 year ago, I thought I was saying goodbye when I sent Astra for help," Rowan said, his voice growing softer, more reflective. "I never imagined she would not only come back for me, but bring back so much more. A new purpose, a new community, a new understanding of what's possible when we refuse to give up on those others have deemed beyond help." Astra, as if understanding her role in the ceremony, gracefully stepped forward to stand beside Rowan, her presence a living testament to the power of resilience. "Sometimes those who have suffered the most are the ones who find the strength to save others," Rowan concluded, placing his hand gently on Astra's neck. "Some heroes wear uniforms, some wear lab coats, and some, the most unlikely ones, have hooves." As applause filled the courtyard, Sergeant Nolan Hayes watched from the side, his new partner Maverick sitting attentively at his feet. The crowd rose in a standing ovation that seemed to stretch into the velvet Texas night, a celebration not just of one remarkable animal, but of the spark of hope she had ignited in all of them. In the days and years that followed, the Unlikely Heroes Project would continue to grow, expanding to international recognition and changing countless lives. Research papers would be published documenting the extraordinary success rates of their unique approach to trauma recovery. Funding would pour in from both private donors and government agencies, impressed by the measurable results. But for those who were there at the beginning, who witnessed a small white horse stand trembling in the middle of a highway, determined to overcome her deepest fears to save someone she loved, the project would always remain, at its heart, the story of Astra. A horse that no one wanted, a mission that seemed impossible, and a journey that proved that sometimes heroes come in the most unlikely forms. As Rowan made his final rounds of the center that night, checking on the animals before heading home, he found Astra standing quietly in her stall, her intelligent eyes watching him with that same calm wisdom that had defined her from the beginning. "So you know what you did, don't you, girl?" he murmured, stroking her soft muzzle. Astra nickered softly in response, leaning her head against his shoulder in a gesture of affection that needed no translation. Outside, the stars shone brightly in the clear Texas sky, mirroring the small white mark on Astra's forehead, a connection between earth and heaven, between pain and healing, between past and future. A reminder that sometimes all it takes is one unlikely hero to show us the way forward. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.